So this evening we are very lucky to be joined by Danielle Drees. Danielle is affiliated faculty in literature at Emerson College and a visiting lecturer on theatre at Harvard University. She received her PhD with distinction in theatre and performance from Columbia University and holds degrees from the University of Cambridge and Harvard College. Danielle's research examines how feminist, queer, disabled, and working class artists use theatre and other aesthetic forms as sites of political experimentation. She is particularly fascinated by how feminist and queer performers and playwrights have used sleep in their art to work through exhaustion and burnout and to imagine more sustainable forms of political action. Her book, Sleep with Spectators, Feminist Performance and Practice, will be out from the University of Minnesota Press in September 2026. Very exciting. Danielle's next book project will be a biography of the 17th century gender fluid performer Moll Cutpurse. Danielle lives in Brookline, Massachusetts. In her spare time, she talks about art with learners of all age at Boston's Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Now, Isabella wrote an incredible article that's freely accessible on JSTOR about feminist artists and sleep, and it was one of the first articles that I read in my research for the sleepers, and was really fundamental. So I'm so happy that I was able to bring Danielle to come and talk to you all about this. Well, I think that's enough from me, so I'll hand over to Danielle now and see you all again at the end for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for inviting me to talk. Thank you to the Women's Art Collection for developing this incredible exhibition idea. And of course, thank you all for being here, whatever time it is and whatever weather you're having where you're at. I wish I could be there with those of you in the UK and Cambridge seeing this exhibition live, but I have really enjoyed seeing the images that are coming through on the website and thinking about all these artworks alongside some of the work that I've been doing recently. So I was excited when Laura reached out to me about this exhibition, The Sleepers, because it meant that someone else shared my particular kind of weird interest, looking for sleep in art, and in particular, looking for sleep in art that might some way be feminist or in some way related to the experience of women, to differences in gender. And there are a couple reasons why looking for sleep in feminist art might be seen as weird or counterintuitive. The first is that there is this sort of long history in the Western artistic legacy of male artists painting beautiful sleeping women. If you ever walk through a gallery of just like 18th or 19th century oil painting, you'll probably see this. And it's really like the passive woman's body as an art object for male artists and male viewers to gaze at. So I think one of the brilliant things that this exhibition is doing by focusing on the work of women artists, and as Laura said, by thinking about their complex and diverse approaches to sleep and rest, is complicating that history of sort of how women and sleep are portrayed in the legacy of the fine arts. The other thing that might be a little bit weird about looking for sleep in feminist art is that I am a performance scholar primarily. I study theater and performance art, other forms of live performance. And if you think about the last time you went to the theater or a concert, some other kind of live performance, it might have been a little bit weird if people were just on stage pretending to sleep or like acting like they were sleeping. That might be kind of boring to watch. And for theater makers, if the audience falls asleep, that's usually understood as like a really bad thing. That is a bad review for a performance when your spectators fall asleep. So, therefore, looking for sleep in performance is a kind of counterintuitive thing to do. But I think once you start looking for it, it actually is a really exciting venue for thinking about kind of feminist politics and more sustainable futures for all of us. So today I'm going to talk about four pieces of what I'm calling feminist sleep performance. Like Laura said, I'll try to keep this to no more than 40 minutes, nice and up tempo, and leave time for questions at the end. Together, we're going to try to think about, first of all, what performance art is and why performance art and sleep might actually be kind of an unexpectedly good match for each other. Then I want to think a little bit about a particular sort of legacy of feminism, which is thinking about caregiving or caretaking, the way that actually all of our lives are kind of organized around needing and giving care, and how that comes through in this art. And then finally, we'll come back to that question of spectators and what they're doing, and what if they fall asleep, and what if that sleep could actually become a part of the artwork. So that is where we're going. And as Laura said, I do some teaching in galleries in museums, and I always really like to give people a chance to look closely at an artwork before I just jump into talking about it. So we'll do that with this first piece. And I'll just take a breath and give you a moment to look at this image and think about what could be going on in this performance. What is going on in this performance? So, some things that I'm noticing are this sort of like top third of the image. We have some kind of like, I don't know, Adventureland amusement park scene. And then the bottom two thirds, it's like a sandy beach, and there's this figure lying on it, and they're a bit hard to see, but they're close to us, close to the camera. And this is a piece called Institutional Dream Series. It was created by Laurie Anderson in 1972 and 1973 in various locations in New York City. And this is a great piece for thinking about what performance art is, because it comes out of like an incredible moment, the sort of inaugural moment of performance art in the middle of the 20th century. And some things that characterize performance art are, first of all, that the body is the medium. Instead of making art with paints or clay or whatever other artistic material, artists are using their own bodies to make something. And then there often is also documentation that might be writing or photographs or video. A second thing about that is characteristic of performance art is that it is what we might call time-based media. It happens over a span of time and then it's over. It doesn't last forever the way that we think an oil painting might last forever. And those two things actually have a lot in common with sleep. Sleep is something we do with our bodies. Our bodies kind of take over from our conscious brains in ways that can be relaxing and relieving when sleep is going well, but also complicated when sleep is going poorly or we can't get enough sleep or enough good sleep. And sleep is also a time-based event. We don't really remember it after it happens. We might remember like dreams or waking up, but it's what the poet Anne Carson calls that slab of outlaw time punctuating every pillow. It's like a blank that just takes up a third of our lives. So, in order to really think about sleep, to understand it, to see it together, I think it's really useful to look at performance art, to look at people experimenting with sleep in public ways so that we can better understand it, maybe better care for others' sleep, and have a better relationship to it. And so that is exactly what Laurie Anderson is doing here. She is sleeping in public places all over New York City. When she's making this performance, she has just graduated with an MFA in sculpture from Columbia University. She's like a brand new professional artist. And she's living in New York at a time when it's considered a very dangerous place to live. There's crime, there's sort of a bad, I don't know, reputation for the city. And she talks about being really interested in public sleep as a kind of taboo. That if you like sleep in public, you have stopped being alert to dangers in the way that you're supposed to be if you're in a big city, maybe especially if you're a woman in a big city. So she experiments with breaking this taboo by sleeping in public spaces and by recording the dreams that she has in these spaces. She's interested in whether sleep might, in these different spaces, might change her dreams in some way. And she even connects this back a little bit to being an art history student and saying that she used to fall asleep during art history lectures. And then the images on the slides would sort of like enter her dreams and morph into other shapes. And so she's sort of curious about this as an artistic strategy as well. So here you see a couple other images from iterations of this performance. On the left is the first version, and it's very simple. Anderson took a nap during the day in a university library, something that some of you listening might also have done, and maybe you didn't realize you were doing performance art. But here's Anderson sleeping in a library on the left, and she said it did influence her dreams. Beforehand, she had been looking at the shelves of books, and then she dreamed that she was in a fruit and vegetable market with all these stalls of produce. So sleep did offer a way to sort of like reimagine the world around her, to turn this college library into like an outdoor fruit stall. And then as these performances go on, as Anderson does more versions of them, they get a little bit more complex and a little bit more dramatic. So on the right, you have a picture from one that I particularly like, this vertical image. And it's Anderson sleeping in New York City's night court. And I'm not sure how many other cities have night courts, but it's originally was developed in the early 20th century as a place to take people who had been arrested overnight. It was often particularly associated with arrests of presumed sex workers, women who were on their own in public spaces. Um, LGBTQ women were sort of overrepresented in these courts because they were often out on their own, and that in itself was seen as kind of scandalous. By the 1970s, night court has become sort of a regularized part of New York City life. Occasionally, celebrities come through there. Apparently, David Bowie was arrested at night court at one time. Um, but here in this image, Anderson doesn't look like a celebrity at all, and she wasn't a celebrity yet. She just looks like this very nondescript, small person in like a stocking cap and a little coat, someone who doesn't seem like they're causing any trouble at all. But because there's documentation, she wanted images of this performance. She actually had her friend Geraldine Pontius, or Jerry Pontius, there photographing all of these performances. And what Anderson says is that the judge saw this photography taking place and accused them of trying to blackmail somebody else in the court. And he made this big show out of it, of like trying to get their camera from them or get the film out of the camera, like they were doing something inappropriate. And then Anderson and Jerry had to sort of respond in kind, and they told him they were architecture students just trying to take pictures of the beautiful building. And so this whole drama erupted out of what was originally just a kind of very quiet, almost private piece of performance art. And I think that speaks to the ways that, like, paying attention to sleep as a social experience, really watching sleep happen closely, can lead us to see all sorts of new things about it and all the ways that sort of like, in this case, institutional power might function in the world, with the judge kind of like exercising the power of the court and his power as a man over these two young women. So that's Anderson's Institutional Dream series. And then I want to move us now to thinking about sleep in another sort of really specific kind of institution. And that's this piece here. Um, and this is what visitors to this particular second performance would have seen upon arriving. So again, I'll give you a moment just to look at the photograph and think about this question, which is, what ideas about sleep and care does this image evoke? So as I'm looking at this photograph, the first thing I'm noticing is that there might be something like a crib close to this open doorway, but it's in this very strange space that doesn't really look that much like a bedroom or a children's bedroom. And it's up on this trailer on a sort of concrete floor that also doesn't look very soft or comforting. And in fact, the sort of institution being depicted here is a particular kind of prison. This performance was created by the Guatemalan performance artist Regina José Galindo, and it's called America's Family Prison, and it was performed in San Antonio, Texas in 2008. And when Galindo created this performance, she was sort of responding to two different questions about care and caretaking. One was that she had just had a child, and she got invited to do this artist residency at a gallery called Art Pace San Antonio. And she was trying to figure out how she could leave her child for 2 months and go do the residency. And so, like many other sort of working parents or working mothers, she figured out a way to bring her child into the performance. The other thing she'd been thinking about is she had been hearing these and reading these sort of reports and stories from activists about a new kind of incarceration that was happening in the US called family immigrant detention. And this particular version of incarceration developed after September 11th, 2001, very quietly. It was sort of like a byproduct of new securitization policies in the US, where if a family entered the US without immigration documents, rather than just like sort of waiting, living wherever they lived, waiting for their immigration trial, they actually sometimes were put into prison as a whole family together before the trial, which most people in the US did not know was happening. It was very quiet. And so activists who were concerned about it were having, sort of a tough time getting the word out and getting this to change. So Galindo made this piece called America's Family Prison. It was a 24-hour performance. And in this performance, she rented a real family jail cell from a company that was making them for this private prison in Texas. And she spent 24 hours in it with her husband and their young child, who sort of is like an old baby in this performance. She can like stand up a little bit in the photos, but she's not really moving around on her own. So she's quite young. Um, and in doing this, I'm interested in the ways that Galindo makes like the situation of family caretaking, which is a huge interest for feminists across at least the past 50 years, but really across centuries, and how she puts that situation of family caretaking into the very troubling situation of incarceration and asks her viewers to think about like what is it really like to try to be a family, to try to raise a family, to try to care for a child in prison. Um, there was sort of reporting coming out about family immigrant detention around the same time that really described how harrowing bedtime and nighttime was for these families in prison. um, if someone wanted to leave their cell in the nighttime, only guards could respond to it. If a child cried out for a parent in another cell, only guards could respond. And some of the incarcerated people reported that actually, if a parent went and helped out a child at night, the parent and child were threatened with long-term separation. So just an extremely troubling story about bedtime in these facilities. And there's this really interesting image from the performance that I've been thinking a lot about. And it's this image, it comes from a video of the performance. It's a video still taken outside of the cell, which is resting in the gallery on this kind of flatbed trailer. So on the right-hand side of the image, you see these two people kind of waiting to look inside, waiting their turn. And then on the left-hand side of the trailer, you see what kind of looks to me like three people in a group. There's like a woman and a man. And then if you look closely, it looks like there's a child standing in front of the man closer to the cell. You can see sort of a leg just visible. And so, in some ways, this grouping of a man and a woman and a child mirrors the family that is inside the cell. Not that every family looks this way, but in this particular instance, they sort of are mirror images of each other. And this has made me think about how Galindo is using ideas about family and motherhood at bedtime to try to raise a response to this practice of family detention. I think often in the US and maybe in other wealthy countries, people who are citizens get told that they need to like protect their families from people crossing the border, right? Your responsibility as a mother or a good parent is to take care of your own family. Here, I think this performance is suggesting, what if your responsibility as a mother or a parent is actually to know how complex raising a family is, how complex like caring for a child is, and then to be very concerned about people who are being forced to try to do this in prison, and maybe to, rather than just protecting your own family, to try to reach out to those other families in some way. And that in this performance was really effective. I don't always think about whether performances sort of work or not. I don't measure them in that way. But in this case, we do have evidence that that there was a kind of immediate effect because in August of 2009, this Texas announced that it was ending the practice of family detention at this site. Partly because of the way Galindo's performance raised protests. There were other protesters and activists and news articles being written about the practice. And so they were able to shut down this family detention site. Of course, if you follow the news, you will know that other immigration policies in the US have also become very harmful and very violent since then. But with this particular sleep performance, we get a moment of sort of, I don't know, like a feminist success in shutting down this really disturbing institution. Here, we've also been able to think a little bit about what the spectators at a sleep performance do. And that's where we're going to move for the next couple pieces I talk about. So here is a third image, another sleep performance. And here I'm asking, what role would you play in this sleep performance? This is a participatory piece. So what role would you play in this performance? And what you might be seeing here is lots of spectators sort of in the background looking at what's happening, and then a line of people who seem to be napping lined up right across a crosswalk, which always makes me wonder about what traffic looked like on the other sides of this crosswalk, and whether I would be able to be one of the people lying down or would prefer to be a person sort of standing and watching. This comes from a series of performances created by the Japanese artist Sakiko Yamaoka. Yamaoka was trained as an oil painter and has worked for many years now making performance art, really all over the world. I encountered archives of her work in Hong Kong, but you can sort of find her everywhere. And this series has a couple titles, Best Place to Sleep and Come With Me. And it was performed in various locations at least from 2007 to 2012. It's such a short and sort of slippery kind of performance that I think there's probably more versions of it than I've been able to track down. Some of the locations it was performed include Tokyo and Toronto, Canada. In these pieces, initially Yamaoka by herself would go sleep in a particular kind of public space. She would just sort of lie down for a brief nap and see how people sort of moved around her or dealt with the presence of someone sleeping. And then as she developed it, she started to bring other people along with her. So there would be these very short public naps, um, almost a little bit like a flash mob, except instead of being like a song and dance, it would be this very quiet thing where a group of people in regular clothing just converged on a space, lie down for a few minutes to sleep, and then left and went about their days. And here's another image of that happening. And this, I think, is in a particularly interesting location. And I think the locations for Best Place to Sleep are really important to think about. This is a performance that's really often staged in banks, in sort of bank lobbies or ATM cash machine vestibules, so that the sleepers come in and they sort of converge and lie down and they block people's access temporarily to the ATMs. And when you watch their YouTube videos of these performances, and when you watch them, you see that people sort of like get interrupted on their way to pick up their cash and have to figure out how to navigate around these sleeping people. And this makes me think about a couple things. One of the things it makes me think about is how quickly we expect to be able to get a hold of cash. Um, how quickly we expect financial transactions and the sort of global flow of capital to take place. And the ways that someone napping in a public space just for a few minutes can make us aware of that, might make us aggravated or surprised or concerned, but can change our relationship to that very fast flow of money. A second thing that this makes me think about is the where we when and where we are used to seeing people sleep in public spaces, particularly unhoused people, and the ways that they might be harassed or bothered if they were trying to sleep here in a bank, or In this image, if they were trying to sleep on the sidewalk in this sort of luxury shopping district in Tokyo, this is another version of the performance that was staged right outside a Cartier store. And so this piece, I think, asks us to think about what our priorities are and how much we value sort of um, money and luxury goods over the possibility of resting in public space when you need it. Yamaoka talks about this idea she has that she calls the elegant gesture. And the elegant gesture, she says in one of her artist statements, is some way of posing in space, of positioning your body that responds to injustice, that fights back against something that is hurting you, but not in a violent way, in a way that is in some way elegant, that like reflects the situation and maybe intervenes in it without trying to cause harm. And that's sort of like a big idea to wrap your head around. I read that in her artist statement. I was like, oh, elegant gesture. Okay. But I think we see that in these performances of napping in daytime in public space. We see this elegant gesture of her participants um, putting their sleeping bodies and their need for rest in the way of other people's priorities and other institutions' priorities, and seeing what happens, like what comes of that. And then the last sort of big piece, big performance piece I'm going to talk about asks some similar questions. So here is one more photograph and one more sort of close looking question for you. I'll tell you that this is meant to be a bed. And so I'll ask what it would feel like to sleep in this bed. What would sleeping in this bed feel like? And to help you think about this, I can tell you a little bit more about the materials because comes from a very large scale installation that I visited. So I've gotten to see this one in person. So at the center, this sort of like dark brown pool is dried black beans with a sort of velvety weighted blanket resting on top of them, that purplish shape. Around the edges, this sort of curtain or canopy is made up of mylar foil blankets. And then the plants you can see dangling down at the top are dried lavender. So those are the materials that make up this bed. And the bed comes from a piece called Black Power Naps, created by the artists Navild Acosta and Fannie Sosa. These artists, actually, like all the artists I'm talking about today, are active and practicing artists with web presences. And I hope that if you're interested in any of them, you'll sort of go search them out and try to see some of their work in person because it's really fascinating. Black Power Naps was performed in various locations, including Madrid, Miami, and a couple different sites in New York City, Performance Space One, and then the Museum of Modern Art from 2019 to 2023. And I believe there is the possibility of future installations of this piece. So am hopeful for that and looking out for that. Black Power Naps, uh, I've sort of been calling it an installation, and that's because it is objects in a gallery. And then to me, it becomes a performance when spectators come in because it is made for certain spectators to rest on these objects and to get a sense of public daytime sleep here. Um, you might be hearing in the title a couple different ideas, Black Power Naps. So, power naps are like, I think this term comes to us from the 1980s or 70s. It's like a workplace thing, right? If you're like an important office worker and you need to have a lot of energy and great ideas, maybe you take like a 20-minute power nap and then you like snap back to doing great work for the rest of your afternoon. So it's a kind of individualist, productivity focused idea, the power nap, that isn't really so much about like rest as it is about returning to work bigger and better than you were. And then the other part of the title is Black Power, the 20th century and ongoing movement for liberty and self-determination for Black Americans facing histories of discrimination in the country that I live in. And so when you put them together, you get this question about this like collective movement yoked to this idea of like individual rest and how those turn out together. So, what Acosta and Sosa did in making Black power naps is they created these really large scale, gorgeous, multi-textured beds, and they installed them in these kind of large gallery spaces. And all the materials in the beds have meaning, especially for Black Americans and for other minoritized groups like Indigenous Americans and migrants. So that bed that I showed you in the first photograph, you're now seeing it sort of way in the back of this image, this like golden apparition in the back. That bed takes the sort of survival materials that you might associate with crossing the US border from Mexico into the US, that migrants might associate with that crossing. Uh, the stress, the fear, and turns them into a restful kind of bed. So, in their writing about this performance, the artists and their colleagues talk about how those dried black beans might become a kind of like weighted blanket that you can sink your body into and feel the weight of the beans calming you down, slowing your heart rate, making you feel surrounded and safe. The mylar blankets are sometimes associated with places where migrants are held after they arrive in the US. They are famously cold institutions. They get called hieleras or ice boxes. So, in those situations, those foil blankets are for survival. But here they turn it into sort of like a canopy bed, like this majestic, eye-catching space. And then the plants that you might see along the way, like lavender, become a kind of aromatherapy. So you have this multi-sensory, really comforting place to sleep. And it's not a place that's just designed to make like any random person comfortable, but specific people who have maybe experienced particular kinds of exhaustion in a US context. Acosta and Sosa, in their writing, talk about something called the racial sleep gap, which is the sort of data supported phenomenon of Black Americans getting much less sleep than white Americans on average, and the kinds of health problems, long term complications, long term effects on people's lives that can lead to. So, in making this piece, they are thinking about how they can use art to invite spectators to sort of like ameliorate their own experience of the racial sleep gap and recuperate some of the lost sleep from the history of exploitation of Black people in the US, going all the way back to enslavement. They also, I think, do a really interesting thing in this piece, particularly the version of it that was at Performance Space One in 2019. They do a really interesting thing of thinking about like their own labor as artists and their own need for care and where the resources, the money for that comes from. For this particular installation, they were able to get sponsorship from a company called Buffy. I don't know if you've ever seen ads for Buffy, but they make something called the Cloud Comforter. It's this like fluffy white duvet that you're seeing in the bottom right of your screens. And when I went to see this in Performance Space One in PS1, the whole like antechamber, the lobby to the gallery was like bright white, filled with these comforters, filled with Buffy advertisements and like screens showing their Instagram. Um, and it was all about how like Buffy can solve everybody's sleep problems the same way. If you can't sleep, buy a Buffy comforter, and that will be the solution. And then when you went into the main gallery and saw this like darkened, sort of twinkly space with these rainbow colors, these very specific, distinctive beds, and this sign right at the entrance to the gallery saying, like, if you see a Black person sleeping, don't call the police. Never. This reminder that, like, sleep is not the same for all of us, and especially public daytime sleep is not treated in the same way for all of us. Uh, was a reminder, I think, that sleep is not like a one size fits all solution. It's not something you can just buy your way out of. And that we have to have bigger sort of institutional and structural and thoughtful changes to housing and healthcare, to injustice, to make sleep sort of a better experience for the people who most need it. And they talk about how that includes artists and the sort of artists who are brought in to do these pieces for like spectators of color, who are sometimes not treated well by arts institutions, and the way that arts institutions also have a role in caring for and caring for the exhaustion of the artists that they bring in. So those are the four performances I wanted to talk about. And then I'll close by speaking about one final installation that is a little bit connected to this exhibition, The Sleepers. So this is just a piece that I love. It was made by the artist Tracy Emin, who I believe has a painting. One of her paintings is shown in this exhibition. Um, this is a sort of installation piece. Again, it blurs the relationship between installation and performance because I think it's kind of activated as a performance when a spectator gets involved. It's called Everyone I Have Ever Slept With, 1963 to 1995. It's from relatively early in Emin's career. It premiered in a sort of group exhibition called Sensation. And when it originally was shown for the first time in the late 90s, uh, critics had a kind of predictably sexist reaction to it. They said, "Oh, everyone I have ever slept with, Emin's at it again. This is just like a list of her sexual partners. This woman is ridiculous." I actually think I'm saying it more nicely than they said it. But this is another sleep performance that I think rewards attention to the complexity and diversity of our experiences of sleep and rest. If you sort of get down and like go inside this tent or follow the camera inside this tent, you see that it is not just a list of sexual partners. It is a list of friends of Emin's grandmother, of boyfriends and girlfriends, of two terminated pregnancies. It's a list of everybody Emin ever slept alongside, anyone Emin ever cared for as they slept or was cared for by as she slept. And they're all added to the tent in these sort of like quilt square appliques that make the kind of material of sleep, the tent walls and the squares of a quilt, also the record of how social sleep is and how much we depend on one another's care when we sleep. And the legacy of this piece is kind of interesting and reflects that because this piece was purchased by a major British art collector. It was stuck in a warehouse in London, the Montmartre warehouse, which is pretty common. A lot of art in our world is just tucked away in warehouses right now. And then overnight in 2003, that warehouse caught on fire and much of what was inside burned down before a fire brigade was able to come and put it out. And that includes this piece and another piece that Emin had made. And Emin has never reconstructed this artwork. So, like, I've never gotten to see it live. I would love to hear if anyone on the call was able to see it before it was destroyed. And of course, the loss of art is huge, but doesn't compare at all to the loss of lives to fire. When I think about this piece, I always think about Grenfell Tower also, and the ways that overnight fires in places where there hasn't been enough regulation, enough care for the people who are sleeping in public housing or less wealthy neighborhoods, the kind of danger that that can cause and the kind of vulnerability people experience just day to day when they're sleeping. So I'll leave you with that piece and those thoughts and just tell you last about sort of where these pieces come from, how I discovered them. So, as Laura said, these pieces are all in my forthcoming book, Sleep with Spectators, Feminist Performance and Practice. And I have been instructed by the publicist for the press to tell you that if you go to my website, danielledrees.com, you can learn more about the book and put your name on a list to be notified when it becomes available for purchase. That is everything from me. Thank you so much for listening and thinking about these pieces with me today. And I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Laura.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Danielle. That was amazing. It was so, I loved hearing about some of the ideas that I've talked through with so many people and visitors of the exhibition, but hearing them talked about in an entirely different context. It was, yeah, it was really rewarding for me to listen to you talk about that, and to learn more about those works. So we do have time for questions now. There's a chat button along the bottom of the call, and you can just pop your question in there. Whilst people are kind of warming up, I will kick us off. I wanted to think specifically about the context and the places that these works took place. So, of course, some of them were museum installations, kind of they were given space and materials and kind of commissioned, you could say. And then the others are kind of spontaneous acts of, public art. And I just wondered about if you could talk a little bit about how the reception of how the works were received according to their different contexts and locale.
Yes, I think that's an insightful question because as I think about their reception, there is very, very little information about Anderson's Institutional Dream series or Yamaoka's Best Place to Sleep, which are the two that were most spontaneous, public, like not gallery supported works. One of the really interesting things about working on this book has been trying to dig into the documentation and like resurface these performances that were so short-lived, seen possibly by so few people, and try to think more about them. It's like an incredible thing about performance art that like anyone can do it. You could go do Best Place to Sleep in the nearest like ATM vestibule to your home tonight if you wanted to, right? But it also means that like they don't get a lot of institutional support. There are very few people maybe who get to see them happen live, and so we can sometimes like miss them. Um, I think in contrast, America's Family Prison was in the gallery for 2 months. That cell stayed in the gallery, so a lot more people got to see it. Actually, apparently, the company that makes the cell just used it to show potential buyers also. Like they brought in prison owners and like were able to show the cell to them, which speaks to, I think, how realistic the performance was.
Mm.
And then Black Power Naps has had more of a life going from gallery to gallery. I think it's gotten some really positive attention. They have also had some problems with audience members who maybe don't respect the sort of need for quiet and sleep in this place. So I think the attention has been positive, but also it reflects how tough it can be to bring an artwork focused on like Black people's rest specifically into like a more, I don't know, majoritarian space and whether people are kind of ready to respond to it.
Yeah, there have been
Wow.
instances as well. Was it when the Black Power Naps was installed at MoMA where they had to kind of temporarily suspend it or something?
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah, there was like a black a couple of black people visiting, like spectators were asked to leave because they were accused of making noise, but that seems not to have actually been what was going on at all. There was a weird kind of, I think, racist policing of that space. So like I don't know, it's like a live challenge and something that I think you can see the importance of because it is still a challenge for institutions to host.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting. And I did actually reach out to the artists who behind Black Power Nap at the very beginning of this exhibition, but after a short conversation, we realized that doing the installation in our very small exhibition space would not be possible. But I wanted to just, bring them in conversationally, if nothing else. But
Yeah,
hopefully
that's
we'll be able to see an installation of it in the UK at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think one of the incredible things about it is like the scale and the production value. Like they are really thinking in as big a way as possible about it. But then that also means like they need big spaces, storage is expensive. Like,
Mm.
yeah, the material concerns always come back.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So Karen has asked a question. I'm thinking of Max Richter's Sleep. Very good. Recently performed in London, which he called an 8-hour lullaby, where the audience are given beds to listen sleep through the 8-hour piece. I wonder what you think about the audience being part of the performance art, the sleep experience, and anything you have to say about this. I saw photos of the hall with the individual beds each audience member got with their ticket instead of a seat, which was a powerful piece of performance art in its own right. I love Max Richter, so I'd love to hear you talk about this, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, for this question. And I think you're right to say that even just seeing that like what you get with a ticket is a bed rather than like a row of chairs is already a change in how we think about performance and spectatorship. There has been this recent, I think, as sleep has become a really big sort of wellness concern in the past 10 years. there have been more of these performances that like invite people to come sleep while a particular performance happens in front of them or around them. There's this Max Richter piece. There's also a piece by a British group called Ducky, I think, called Lullaby that you might be interested in. I think an interesting thing about these pieces and something I'm curious to learn more about is that they sort of ask everybody to have the same experience of sleep. Like, I think in some ways they're hoping that just having like a beautiful piece of music or whimsical performance will help everybody sleep better.
Mm.
And it's a sort of premise that's like a little bit different from Black Power naps, which is thinking about sort of specific reasons people might sleep poorly in specific populations. So they have kind of different ways of coming about it. But I think they share this idea that it might be useful to see sleep as something that is social, that even if we're doing it privately in our homes, we're always depending on other people to take care of us and on these larger sort of infrastructures of shelter and care to keep us safe. And maybe that becomes more visible in like a sort of performance space where everyone is sleeping alongside each other.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I love Max Richter's music, but I don't think I could ever sleep in such an open
I
in
know
such
some
an open
people, I've
space.
read reviews of some of these performances, and some people, I think there's also a little bit of personality. Like some people do great with it, and some
Mm.
people are like, it's like being on a long haul flight, could not sleep at all. Like someone was snoring next to me. So I don't know, sleep isn't magic. Like it's social in the ways that like social life is complicated.
Yeah, I love, yeah, I need my eye mask and my earplugs and my white noise.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
Mia has asked, do you know of any performance art pieces that deal with strange dreams or nightmares? Punch Drunk's latest piece, Viola's Room, comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, Punch Drunk is a big one. It's a British company that does these sort of immersive theatrical performances. They are big on thinking about nightmares. I think that's actually, Mia, a great example. I originally got interested in this project because I saw another Punch Drunk piece, Sleep No More, where sleep is like right there in the title, which is an immersive version of Macbeth. And Macbeth is full of like nightmares and insomnia, right? And when you go see this piece, you have to run after the characters. Like you don't get any rest as an audience member. So it makes you feel a little bit like Lady Macbeth, just like no rest running around. So that Punch Drunk is actually like what comes to mind primarily in terms of like nightmares or bad dreams. But I will say, actually, there are a lot of kind of like mainstream theater pieces that are really interested in nightmare. Like the Nutcracker Ballet is all about a nightmare that turns into a kind of happy dream. Um, or dream ballets in pieces like Oklahoma are often kinds of like nightmare where the character is like working out some sort of problem that has to be resolved for the piece to continue. So I actually think this is that you're like right on that this is a big theme in performance about sleep.
Mm. Yeah, I've like been thinking the last few weeks as I've been talking to more people about the exhibition that if I ever got the opportunity to do a part two, it would be about dreams and or nightmares. But it's such a rich topic, isn't it? Even the subject of performance art and sleep, I'm sure you could have given many more examples. Does anyone else have any other questions? Dreams, yes, thank you. Thank you
It
for
sounds
knowing
like
that I
other
have your
people
support.
want part two. Yeah.
Well, there's a work in the exhibition called A Healing Dream, and it's by a British artist called Laura Foots, and it's certainly been one of the most talked about works in the exhibition, or the one that captures people's attention the most. I found being in there with people, because she's laying on the bed, but there's these kind of mysterious hands on her that some people see as healing, other people think they're slightly nightmarish, like her eyes touches on her disability, and some people have likened it to when you're in the medical system and you're used to having anonymous hands on you, and it's the one that people have disagreed on the most in their interpretation. But I love that, the idea that this could be interpreted as being something healing and also could be something kind of frightening. So yeah, there's lots to unpack there. Anyway, I digress. Um, can you tell us anything else about the book that you've got coming out, perhaps? Like, what else can we expect to read about in the book?
Yeah, so it's thinking about the past 50, 55 years from 1970 to the present, and thinking in particular about the ways that feminist and queer politics haven't always left a lot of space or time for sleep. There's this historian, Sarah Evans, and she says that like when you can see how the world could change overnight, like right in front of you, why would you sleep? Like you just want to make it happen, which I think has been so true of my experience of political organizing, probably many other people's. Um, but of course, on the other side of that is like burnout and fatigue and backlash and infighting. So I'm trying to take like 7 or 8 different pieces of performance art or theater about sleep and look at the ways that they think about where sleep fits into political action for feminists, for queer people, people of color, people with disabilities, and how that can become sort of a bigger part of our political movements. And how art in particular might be like a really good space for thinking about this. Like it can be hard to think about in a protest or a organizing meeting,
Mm.
but art offers us this like imaginative space to try out different ways of living and different ways of resting. And so if you're a theater person, there also are pieces in there by Carol Churchill and Irene Forness and Sarah Kane and Philip Venables and Devon Tynes that you could look out for also.
Great. Well, I'm definitely going to go to your website and sign up so that I hear when it's out. Um, so number one fan over here. I would love to read about sleep even after this exhibition is finished. Um, okay, well, we haven't had any questions for a few minutes, so I think we can call it a night here unless anyone has any other questions for Danielle. But this evening has been so brilliant. It's been so lovely to speak to an expert on sleep and art. We spoke again earlier this year, didn't we? But it's nice to hear you talk about these works specifically. And yeah, just amazing to connect us all with you and your work. So yes, I'll just finish by saying go and have a look on Danielle's website and sign up to hear about the book. Also, I'll be sending around a survey in about half an hour. It's automated to send, and it just gives you a chance to let us know what we did well, what you could improve about this event. And this event has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel that will also be sent around to attendees later, maybe early next week. Um, so yes, on that note, thank you, Charlotte. I hope you all sleep well. For us in the UK, it's 7:30. And Danielle, have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you so much for being here and for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.